We know that changing the pressure that we place on a drawing tool like a pencil can allow us to change the value of a color. In this case, the color is gray. We also know that using a different pencil, like say a 4B versus a 2B, will give us a different result. So a 4B is going to have more graphite. It's going to be more pure of graphite. So it's going to allow us to create a darker value than a 2B. So as an artist, I might change pencils to help me achieve different values. But we can also change value in this manner by changing the density of the mark making. So for instance, if I lay down a bunch of parallel lines like that in that space and then continue but put them closer together, what I'm doing is I'm covering up more of the white of the paper, so therefore I'm achieving a darker value. Maybe to make it more obvious, I'll continue this way and I'll spread my lines out even more. So in other words, I've got a dark value, or I guess I should say, sorry, a middle value. That would be a middle value. This is the dark value and this is the light value. In order to do that here with pressure, by varying pressure, I have my dark, my middle, and then for my light, okay, so I would switch to my 2B and then continue on but not press as hard. So just knowing that we have an alternative to varying pressure in order to create different values. So if I was going to do a value spectrum, once again I would start with a 3 centimeter by 21 centimeter box and then divide it into 7 sections, 3 centimeter sections, so that I can practice changing density in order to create 7 different values. So I can still use a pencil, and I could use any old pencil really, because it's not really about the pressure, it's about the density of the mark making. So maybe I'll start in the middle with a middle value, and I'll just make parallel lines like that. And then if I'm gonna go to the right and decide that that's where my value will be lighter, I'm just gonna space out the lines so that there are fewer of them. So I'm decreasing the density of the mark making. But when I go to the left, I want to increase the density of the mark making in order to cover up more of the white of the paper in order to create a darker value. And of course, this form of varying value can be done with any drawing media. So for instance, I could even use a pen, like a black kind of Sharpie pen. So here, middle value, and then lighter value, spreading out my lines, making my mark making less dense. And of course, if that's going to work with I'm kind of scribbling now to save some time. If that's going to work with the Sharpie type pen, it could even work with a regular old ballpoint pen, even in different color ink, something like blue. So again, it's all about density. Here's a great example. You can see in the skull where I'm pointing here, I would call that kind of a middle value because we still see some white of the paper. Whereas up here, the mark making is more dense, the value is darker. Over here, the mark making is very dense, and so we have a really dark value. And then of course under here, super dark value. And you can see all kinds of different value variation on the face of the skull. Compare that to this drawing where the student has created different values by varying the pressure that he placed on the drawing tool. So like here, this student probably used a dark graphite, maybe like a 6B or 7B for that shape, but pressed very hard to create a dark value. Whereas on the hand here, on the finger, maybe a 2B or a 3B pencil was used with less pressure. And then there's parts of this drawing, like right here, where the student just left the white of the paper showing. Pens, pencils work well with this varying density method, even something like marker. So if I have this marker and I start off with like a dense value, or dense mark making rather, I can spread out my lines to create a less dense form of mark making, which is going to allow me to create a lighter value. Go back over on this side, create a darker value there. Sometimes changing the direction of the mark making is even used. So for instance, I'm going to create a less dense collection of marks over on that side, but then I'm going to go over to my dark end of this spectrum, and I'm going to actually cross my new lines over my existing lines. This classic form of pen and ink value creation is called cross hatching, where I'm changing the orientation of the line. So that can be a really effective way to control a value gradation. Another interesting thing about changing the direction of the mark making is it can enable an artist to start to imply more information about the form of an object. So if I change the orientation of these hatching marks, it almost is suggesting different planes on this three-dimensional object. Almost like this is a sphere that was like whittled out of wood. And so the light is catching these different planes, these different faces differently, and then creating form. Because as the shadow falls on, as the light falls on the form, the natural form of this object, because of how it was shaped and created, it creates different value patterns. So maybe try that in an upcoming drawing. Okay, so just to summarize, we can change value by changing the pressure of a drawing tool, but we can also change the density of the mark making in order to achieve darker or lighter values.